This is Pod Populi.
Podcast for the people.
The Great Love Debate. It's the Great Love Debate.
The Great Love Debate. It's the Great Love Debate.
Hi again, everyone. It's Brian Howie. Welcome to the Great Love Debate, the world's number one dating and relationship podcast. Since 2015, I am back here in the very fine studios of Pod Populi, podcast for the people. Got Cam and Barry on the controls. Give a shout out. A little louder. Yeah, that was terrible. I got to mic him up. I'm the one in Scottsdale, Arizona. It is no longer surface of the sun hot. I think we got through another season here. It's always lovely in the Scots Dazzle. Anyway, we talk a lot on this podcast over the last, 8-9 years about the dating pool and the size of the dating pool. And some people want to say that the dating pool is 6 inches wide and 100 feet deep. And some people say it's 100 feet wide and 6 inches deep. And it's a very rare thing that it is the only body of water that is both deep and shallow at the same time, the dating pool. I think that the dating pool is getting bigger. Now, it's not in the way that we've talked about on the show. I think the traditional dating pool, the people in their 20s and 30s and whatever, I think that has gotten smaller. I think that has shrunk. I think a lot of people dropped out. I think a lot of people are like, I don't need the shit. I don't like the dating apps. I just want to be complete 100% introvert with my dog and my wine and my video games and my porn. And I just don't want a part of it. A lot of people dropped out of COVID and they never came back. Where the growth is happening, for lack of a better term, is in the pool over 50. And not only is it happening because people are living longer, it is happening because a lot of people, especially women, are realizing I can have a second act in my life. I still am very vibrant. There's a whole lot of, I'll just say, medications out there that allow the men to have certain capabilities that they might not have had 20, 30 years ago. And so that has brought a bunch of people back into either both the shallow end or the deep end of the dating pool. That being said, the group of, we'll say, over 50, they have a unique set of advantages, and there's also a unique set of challenges. So I want to get into all that. I brought in somebody, not that she's over 50, I'm not even going to say how old she is, but she also has a particular interest in this demographic. She is a writer, speaker, comedian. She may tell jokes. Bon vivant and host of the Geezer Proofer podcast. And I'll let her explain what that is later on. Nancy Shanker, how are you?
I'm good, Brian. Thank you for having me on your show.
Do you agree that maybe we didn't pay any attention to it back when we were 20, but if I go to Florida or any place like Arizona and there's a lot of retirees, there's a lot of 60 plus dating, sexing, texting, all that going on that I'm not sure happened before.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I think is going on is that people over 60, over 65 are not necessarily retirees. So I fall into that pool and I have my own marketing company. I've got a speaking and writing practice. I'll soon have a podcast. And there still is this archaic assumption, and it's not unfounded, that a lot of people over 65 just want to wait to die and play pickleball until that happens.
That's a really good point. People are working longer. They're second careers. They're entrepreneurs. They're doing longer, which people are like, oh, that means they don't have time to date. No, what that does is it puts them in contact with a lot more people all the time. They're in business environments. They're in networking environments. They're in social environments. And that also leads them not to get stagnant, either physically or psychologically, that their brain is still turned on in a lot of ways because they're working.
Yeah, and I do think that that is one of the differences between men and women in today's dating world, that a lot of men have had corporate careers. You talked about the second act. And when they retire from their jobs, they want to kick back. They want to hang with their grandkids. They want to play pickleball or golf. And the women who have spent a lot of years raising kids, being married, taking care of household chores, we view that as a time of liberation. So there's a very big disconnect between active women over 65 and, for lack of a better term, passive men over 65. So I think also the women of the 80s, we're a generation that has economic independence. We've got smarts. A lot of us have been married previously. And the statistics actually show that a lot of what's called gray divorces are initiated by the women.
Yeah.
And the men are then kind of gobsmacked, and they fall into a few different categories. They're the kids in the candy store who maybe haven't had sex for 2 years and are just out there. They think the dating apps are like the DoorDash of vaginas.
Yeah. I believe that's their new slogan. Yeah. Hear that, DoorDash? You do really well with vaginas. That's true. And so in a town like this, Scottsdale, Arizona, if you go out after 11 o'clock, you're going to see a lot of young people. But if you go out in that sort of happy hour to 9 p.m. zone, you're going to see a ton of women together and not nearly as many men. The men played golf all day. They did something else all day, and they are pooped out by 8 o'clock. That is the single biggest challenge of the women over 50 that we have heard since the day we started this show is, I want to date somebody my age, and the guys my age don't want to do this. They want to sit home. And I had my 20, 25 years of raising my children or whatever. It's my time, and I want to go out, and the guys don't want to do that. So I have to go chasing around young guys. That's who's out there. And then I get this, sort of cougar reputation going on. But really, it's like, I can't find men that are 65 years old who want to go out till 10:30. And
the ones who do want to go out, and I see them a lot out at Eddie V's or any other steakhouse in the Valley, they want the young stuff. And I was in a bar a couple months ago, and there was a guy who had to have been close to 80 with a woman who was in her 20s, and she was like wriggling to get out from under his grip. Here's why they want the young stuff. They don't want the young stuff because the young stuff is hotter. They want the young stuff. That's a good way to put that, the young stuff. They want the young stuff because it is easier for them to get their confidence back and play hero with the young stuff. Somebody takes you out to dinner and buys your dinner. You've done this a lot of times, and you could probably buy your own dinner. Okay? Take a 25-year-old out, no offense to our 25-year-old listener, and buy her 2 glasses of Chardonnay, and you are appreciated. You feel good about yourself. So they're going young to try and feel better about themselves. It's really hard for the men over 50 to impress a woman over 50. And that is the challenge of the rise of the independent woman, which has creeped into the dating pool of all ages, is you're just you don't need us that much anymore, especially at that age. Well, we need men for different things, and it's not necessarily the things that men of that age want to do.
So what do you need a man for who's 62?
I would love a traveling companion.
Get a dog. He's not signing up for that. That's the thing. We hear that. The old Jackie Onassis line is you marry the first time for love and the second time for money and the third time for companionship. That guy doesn't want to be a companion. He wants to be more than that. He doesn't want to be that, that's essentially you can have your hairdresser go with you. You can have your girlfriend go with you. He wants to be the one who took you around the world on a trip and gave you an adventure of a lifetime. And you're not really looking for that. Well,
but I would be fine with that. If a man said to me, I've always wanted to go to Sicily. Would you like to come with me? And it would be a traveling friend with benefits.
Yeah, there has to be the benefits.
Oh, and that's okay. Totally fine.
Yeah.
It depends on the guy, but I would be down with that. The problem is that a lot of the men of that age who maybe have the means to travel, they've traveled for work, they've traveled with their late wife, they've traveled with their first wife.
Their late wife. Oh, that took a turn.
And they're widowhood is a thing.
It is a thing.
This year's Golden Bachelor is a widower who's married for 40 years.
I know. And it's those people are usually a lot of people, because that is a challenging demo that comes to a lot of our shows. And the widow and the widowers, they're like, I'm ready to date. And a lot of people who I want to date don't want to deal with the ghost, is what they call it. It's hard for them to compete with a memory. And so a lot of people are like, I don't want to get into that. And the Golden Bachelor, you brought that up. When I heard his story, I was like, oh, that's so sad. Because he was married a long time, love of his life. And I'm like, if I'm competing for this, and again, this is my weird issue. And I think a lot of people have second and third spouses after somebody passed, and it's just different. It's not better or worse. But you're right. And again, if you're 22 and listening to this, you're like, what? The man worked and the woman stayed home and all. Like, for a big generation, this is what happened. And he did travel for work and he had his adventures. And now he just wants to stay in one place with the same tea time and the same group of buddies. And she's like, it's my time. That's why Howard Stern got divorced. He worked and he went home and he wanted to sit in his basement. And his first wife is like, I need a life. So she got divorced. And his new wife, it's the same rumbling now. He's like, I don't want COVID. I want to stay home. And she's like, I want to have this. That's not unusual.
No, absolutely not. So I think that the population of men over 60, over 65, who really have that energy level and who view, I often say that I have another 33 years left in my life. That's an entire lifetime. And I want to do things.
It's a very precise number.
Well, I will later reveal how old I actually am.
I know, but you might have 50 years, you might have 5. I mean, I don't know.
I'm being optimistic. But however many...
I was giving you 50.
However many it is,
yeah.
There are things that I still would like to do in my lifetime. Mm-hmm. And I'm very clear with the people I meet that those things are on my wish list. And I don't think my bar is particularly high for what it is that I'm looking for. But I know also what I don't want. I don't want to be Netflix and chilling 7 nights a week.
Right.
Or have to go out with my girlfriends 5 out of 7 nights a week because my significant other is too tired. I mean, my ideal would actually be to have a long distance relationship so that we both have our lives, we have our work, we have our kids, we have our grandkids. And then when you meet up,
it's special.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Have you taken dance classes?
I have 2 left feet.
I know, but the men who go to the dance classes of all ages have a little extra vigor. A little energy.
I will have to keep that in mind.
Arthur Murray's or whatever. A little shout out to Arthur Murray's. Are you on the dating apps?
I am on the dating apps. I'm on and off the dating apps.
What is your age parameters?
My parameters are 48 to 72. So it's a pretty wide range. That's not
no, it's a wide range on the low side. Again, not to give away your age, but there's a lot more below you than above you in that range.
I would say it's a mixed bag. I do think, as you said earlier, there are more and more men over the age of 50 who've discovered the apps. Mm-hmm. The apps have done a really good job of broad mass advertising, mm-hmm. and their ads are, this guy's like, somebody liked me. And, mm-hmm. and so the men are flocking saying, maybe that's how I'll meet somebody, or there's guy peer pressure.
Yeah.
The sad thing is a lot of them don't know how to take selfies. There's like the classic bathroom picture where you have a nice face and I can see your toilet.
Right. Or they holding the fish. Yeah,
right.
I get
or
that.
They still believe that Tinder is exclusively a hookup app. So they lead with the sexting.
Well, I don't know if they believe it's for that, but if they lead with the sexting, it's got as good a chance to work as anything else. And we've talked about that to death on this podcast. The women aren't answering anything, so you might as well just lead with that and see who gets interest, especially if you're like, I'm not looking. This is the other both benefit and challenge. In your 20s and your 30s, you are trying to date most of the time to have a relationship and a partnership that's going to last forever and you're going to raise a family and all that. That is usually the goal of people. Once you've gotten through that and for either your spouse is no longer with us or you got divorced or whatever, that little fairy tale of the next 50 years together is gone. Take some of the pressure and some of the idea out of it. It's also like, I know very specifically what I need in my life. I need the fun, the companionship, the laughs, the travel, the whatever. And so then you're like, it's a little bit easier resume to search for. But when you are not driven by that impetus of, I want to find deep and lasting love, that makes it hard too. So it's both easier on one side and it's harder on the other. I think the motivation comes from, I want to fall in love and spend happily ever after with somebody. And when you take that away, which you do over 50, 60, whatever, because either you're jaded or those reasons I just brought about, it's not quite as motivating.
Yeah, I also think that, my generation, again, without revealing my age.
We're going to have a drum roll at the end and she's going to reveal it.
There are a lot of men who either grew up in sexually repressed times, they got married young, they've only been with one woman.
Yep.
They never really allowed themselves that, what I call the wilding stage, where like right after you get divorced, you can have fun for a year, get it out of your system. And maybe these guys will never get it out of their system. And, we talked about the Golden Bachelor. I've seen pictures of his late wife.
Yeah.
And, she looks like a really sweet, solid person, but the women who they cast on as his potential dates look nothing like her. They're all hotties. Yeah. So I'm sure he misses his late wife. 40 years is a long time. But I also think there's probably some...
Is that what it was? 40 years they were together?
Yeah, which is such a rarity. Most marriages don't last 40 years. But I do think there's probably a small part of his brain that's like, yee-haw, now I finally get to go to the fantasy suites with these hot women who look nothing like my late wife. And
we have a good relationship with the Bachelor community, the show, the producers and all that. And back in the day, I pitched a version of that to them. I'm like, you should try it with an old guy. And they're like, nobody wants to see that. But now, that was probably 6-7 years ago. Because dating now is an interesting thing to older people, and older people look better than they do. There are ways at 65 to look 45, and there are ways at 85 to look 65. That the pool, it seems like, oh my God, these are not geriatric people. These are people who look good, and they seem like they should be dating. And the idea of them hooking up is not disgusting to people, and all that stuff. And so I got to take a quick break. I got to pay for Botox and things around here for us aging seniors. I'm with Nancy Shanker. We're talking about dating over 50 and a whole lot more. We will be back right after this. And we are back. So if somebody says to you, is it easier to date at 60 than 20, or is it harder?
I think it's different. I wouldn't say easier or harder. I think you summed it up when you said when you're in your 20s or 30s, you are looking for that happily ever after. And women's biological clocks are still kind of ticking. They have to decide, do I want a child with a spouse? Do I want to have a child by myself, which is now an option? But there is this marriage, mortgage, kid thing that's happening in the 20s and 30s. When you're at my age, it should theoretically be easier because I'm economically independent. I have the flexibility to travel.
Now, why would that make it easier? I think that makes it harder.
Well, you don't have to have tough conversations about money. When you're young and you're...
Right, but if you're 60 and you're broke and he's like, I want to take you on a trip, you're like, yeah, I can't do that myself. Let's go. Like, it takes the safety net away of, I don't need him to do that. It gets back to the need and the want thing again. Like, if you can be excited by an adventure that you could not do on your own, I think that opens up possibilities for the man to get into your world.
I totally agree with that. I think that the apps themselves are ageist. I think the fact that in most of the apps, you're forced to report a number right off the bat. I don't look my age. So I just came back from a 3-day trade show in Vegas. People were talking to me left and right. When even between the time I was 60 and now for the big reveal.
She's 147 years old. Now, how old are you?
I'm 67.
Okay.
So I'm closer to 70 than I am to 60. And I refuse to lie about my age on the apps. And I found that my pool of suitors has dropped precipitously because when men set their age range, sadly, they still have an image.
You're no better. You just said you set it from 48 to 72. So you set 85% of the possibilities younger than you. So they're doing the same thing.
Maybe true. My motivations are different, though. I work in tech, and I still work. So what I found is there are exceptions to every rule. If somebody who was 75, 77, 85 messaged me, Alan Patrikoff, who may or may not still be single, is in his 80s, and he just started a VC fund for age tech. And he did say that he was on Bumble. I haven't been able to find him yet. So again, I'm not going to limit myself based on a number on a birth certificate, but I do find that the fact that on the apps, that's what you're leading with as opposed to interests. And then, in fact, last night I did matches speed dating. Yeah. And one of the guys within the first 3 questions he asked said, how old are you? He didn't say, what do you like to do? Are you involved in, do you still work?
I think, though, a little bit of the asking that and some of the sexual nature of the early dialogue. I think they want to know, not only does shit still work, I think they want to know, is this something you're still interested in?
Right. And that would be an appropriate question for me. And I do sometimes get that. Someone will say, is intimacy still important to you? Which is the gentlemanly way of asking,
that's a very
do you like
intimacy.
to bang? Right.
Yeah, I say, do you want to bang? Yeah, I see intimacy sounds dirty to me.
I know. It reminds me of that scene in Tootsie where Jessica Lange says to Dustin Hoffman, I wish a man would come up to me at a party and say blah, blah, blah. And he goes up to her and he says it and she immediately slaps him across the face.
Right.
So I think it's a hard question to ask.
It is, because some people want to get asked very PG-13, and some people want the X version.
That may be my next infographic. Is 10 ways of asking.
10 ways to ask if somebody is sexually interested. I'll say that.
Or does it still work?
Yeah, I think that's tough. A lot of these guys want companionship, which is a lot of times why they go younger. A lot of times why they go younger is the girl, sex is not even on the table for her with him, which is almost a relief because he can't do it anyway. So he'd rather just be around the pretty thing. The women at 60, they probably want to get laid, And so he feels like it might work once in a while, what's the Toby Keith song? Not as good as I once was, as good once as I ever was.
Yeah, I mean, one of the lines in, when I dispense dating advice is ready to date, medicate. Like if in doubt, if you think it's not going to work, then get it. And you still have a desire to be intimate, again, using that word that's up there with like moist and ointment, because it does just sound like an icky word.
Well, I've been shocked. I always say to the women, I'm like, if a guy had to use Viagra for me, I would be so offended. Most women are like, I don't give a shit what he has to. That's his problem.
Yeah.
They're like, I know. They're like, we don't care.
We don't care.
I know. I would care. That's my ego. Women are like, I don't fucking care. Who cares? Get ready.
I heard that men are starting to take drugs as early as like 40, 45.
No, they're starting to take them as early as 20 and 25. They take it recreationally. So by the time they get to 40 and 45, the body's dependent on it and it's all messed up.
Nice.
It's like the people who took the Adderall recreationally. Like now they're all screwed up. And same thing. So that has, though, brought a generation of daters back who previously probably would have had to drop out at 60-something, I guess. And so then it is more on the table, which has shifted the dating thing, too, that this is going to be I remember my grandmother got a boyfriend at like 88. I didn't think they were having sex, but they wanted to spend time together. And they wanted
not
a partnership.
to gross you out, but they might have been.
They might have been.
Yeah.
May you rest in peace, Grandma. Jesus. I know the old line about the biggest population of sexually transmitted diseases is like over 70 in Florida. They're carrying around shit from the war.
And Sun City.
Yeah, like Sun City. I know. And fine. God bless. But also they're not worried about getting pregnant and they're not worried about anything. So it's really just I think the age of over 60 means, and a good side of it is we are just having fun here. And we really want to share the best parts of our existence with you. And we really are. And the pressures and the stresses and are we going to do this and how are we going to save for college and whatever are gone, which should be liberating. And if you're liberated from the bad stuff and you could just focus on the good, I think that's a good way to date.
I totally agree with you, Brian. And, I've also just encountered a lot of sad men, because they are depressed about getting older. They're confused because maybe their wife was the one who asked for the divorce. Mm-hmm. I get a lot of that. I think I give off like a therapist vibe. And I've been out with men who then spend 20 minutes telling me about how their wife dropped them and how they're kind of lost and they don't know what to do.
And they don't process it and they don't deal with it and they don't have a circle of... The women are usually like, fuck him. Let's go out. We're going to have fun. The guys aren't doing that. And so he's left to process this. And the kids every once in a while are like, you ever hear from mom? Like, it's awful. Like, but there's a lot of men sad who, like I said earlier, completely had their confidence shattered because she woke up one day and she's like, this isn't for me. I have 50 years to go. The kids are gone. I want a new life. And it doesn't involve you. That is a pretty common thing. Now, I don't understand why he can't take that opportunity then and been like, you know what? I was in this, at least from her perspective, relative unhappy situation, and I'm going to make a new life for myself. They don't do that as much, the men.
No, they don't. And I think women, are just used to, because of the way we live, are used to reinvention. We change our hairstyles. Right. If we have kids, we have to go through this stage where we go from single woman to married woman to mother to housekeeper. So we're kind of used to flexing and bobbing and weaving, whereas a lot of men have been the providers, especially men of a certain generation. I meet a lot of men around my age who have never really been with a woman who worked before. Their woman was home. Their wife was home taking care of.
Stay home, woman.
There is something to be said for that lifestyle. It was much simpler. Everybody knew what their roles were.
Yeah, and a lot of women say this, and they're right to say this, that men tend to get stuck in their ways. I don't believe, though, that is a permanent stuck. I think the right woman with the right message and the right proposition can get us to change anything at any age. And a lot of time the women are like, I don't want to have to change him. It's too much work. He's not going to be open to it. But if you present him with a scenario like, this was you up till age 60, and now I'm going to take you in a different world, I think there are men that are open to that if you sort of shake the snow globe up the right way.
I totally agree. And if any of you are listening, I'm still single, so you know where to find me.
It's only 12:30.
But yeah, I think that when you said, that we don't necessarily want to be a nurse or a purse or to be a fixer, I'm not looking to fix somebody who's deeply, deeply damaged or bitter. But if somebody has at least the training wheels and says, yeah, what I was doing before isn't working for me, I'm open to going to Sicily. You could tell I'm like obsessed with Sicily.
I know. Sicily's awesome.
I've never been to a concert that starts at 9:00. I'm there. No, I've never eaten a gummy, but if I can
I want to go to concerts in a place like Santa Barbara where they have a hard curfew of 10 p.m. because of the neighbors. And so there's no chance it's going late. They literally pull the plug on it. I'm like, oh, take me to that concert. Give me that. But I agree with you. Now, would you or have you run across guys that are 62 or whatever and have never been married?
Yes. And I am probably in that. I think at the beginning of my dating journey, I was more of a hard liner about men who've never been married or never had kids. And in fact, I'll do a little pre-selling here. Brian, you're going to be a guest on my podcast for a segment called What the Hell is Wrong with You?
Yeah, I've never been married. And I've never had kids. And I think there is something wrong with me, or has been. Not now. Now I'm fine. But I think that the woman or the man, if you get over 45 and you have not been married, I think the other person has every right to want to know why. And the why is not, I was too busy, I haven't found the right person yet. I think that's bullshit. I think either you were not capable, not emotionally vulnerable, didn't do the work, or you did not recognize the person that were I think there really is. And I was in that category for a long, long time of somebody who was just not capable. So if somebody said to me, oh, I've never been married, I'm 58 years old, I would think it's a giant red flag, even though I'm not 58, but I would have had that too. I think that you have a right to ask. So if somebody's on there and you just say how come you never been married? And they give some flippant answer, I would be it's only 4:00. Yeah. I think you want to know if they've done the work and have a real answer.
Exactly. I totally, totally agree. And even though I've only been single for 3 years since I got out of my last relationship.
Welcome back.
Well, thank you. People will say to me, why haven't you been scooped up already? As if I'm Rocky Road rather than a human being. And I say, well, my goal is not to be scooped up.
But that's a compliment. They don't ask that to people who shouldn't be scooped up. They know why you're not scooped up. So if somebody says that, or they say, why are you still single? And then we get in the argument about this on this show all the time. It's a huge compliment. They do not ask that to people who are unappealing because you know why that person is still single.
This is true. And you just hit on it, Brian. The real question is, if you're going to ask the question, why are you still single? The implication shouldn't be, you must be flawed in some way. It should be and again, this is the psychology major in me talking, because I could have just as easily been single at 67. I just got to a point in my life where I really wanted kids and a family, and I loved my ex-husband, and my friends were all starting to couple up. Yep. But if I hadn't met him, there's probably a better than even chance that I would still be single.
Right. But, because, I'm not sure somebody getting married at 22 for a year and a half makes any difference in their life at 52. You know, I'm like, so what? That was then. Like, I don't think anything anybody does in their 20s and 30s has much relevance at all in terms of doing the work, in terms of things like kids and finance and something. Because a lot of women, I thought like, oh, but wouldn't you rather date a dad because they have some sense of responsibility or whatever? And a lot of women are like, no, they're fucking worse.
Or you could be an irresponsible parent.
Yeah, you could be an irresponsible parent, or you want to be there's a lot of people on both sides of it that are. People are like, don't use sides when you talk about men and women. I mean, have you seen our logo? That they were locked in this mom-dad phase for 20 years. And then once they divorce or whatever the reason is why they separate, they turn back into whatever they were when they went into prison, so to speak. Like they basically like, okay, I'm 23 again and she's running out and getting a terrible tattoo and he's out there, you know, hitting on waitresses and the whole thing goes bad. I don't think somebody who hasn't been married goes through that because they're just in normal. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And as I said, you know, as long as, to me, the most important question, and I wouldn't ask it on a first date necessarily, but like maybe third date or beyond, and And you hit the nail on the head when you said, you know, have you done the work? Like, have you looked internally to, when people ask me why, you know, whether I take responsibility for my divorce, I say, yeah, I take 50% responsibility. And they'll say, well, you should only take 49, as if there's like some prize that I would get. But I think that, you know, in the 10 years that I've been single again or not married, I really have done more work on myself than I did the entire, you know, first 3/4 of my life.
I think you're right. I think that's a very, very valuable question, not for the first date. The most important question you can ask on a first date is, would you like to see a dessert menu? That's it. And then the harder stuff goes when a little bit of the walls have come down and you're like, I really want to get to know you beyond this. Like, what have you worked? Like, how are you different now than 10 years ago, good or bad? Like, I don't think anybody's going to be opposed to that question. And if they have an answer kind of ready to go, I could tell they've done the work. And if they don't know, they haven't done any work.
Or if they say, my spouse started drinking. And then my follow-up question is always, when did they start drinking? Why did they start drinking?
Did you drink together? Yeah.
And if they don't know the answer to that question, that to me is a pink flag.
Is it hard to date somebody who has been, was married for a long, long time, whether they got divorced or widowed or widower? It's like, I was married for 43 years and now I'm back out there. You know, that seems like somebody really has not been in a lot of social dynamic situations maybe, but I don't know. People have been married 43 years and they lead separate lives. So I don't think you can judge that either.
Yeah. I mean, I can usually tell pretty early on if someone was married for a long time and then divorced. You know, there's usually a conversation about at what point did the marriage, and I hate using judgmental words like the marriage fell apart, the marriage failed. I just say, you know, you parted ways.
Here's the question that you should ask. And I ask this, and we ask people on this podcast a lot too when they're divorced. It's not why did you get divorced, is when did you know it wasn't going to be forever? Right. And so many people say, when he asked me, the wedding day, and I'm like, well, you were married 23 years. And they're like, well, we had kids, and I'm doing the math in my head all the time. I got 4 more years, I got 6 more years or whatever. That to me just sounds awful, but it's also normal. Right. Lots of people are like, when the youngest is 18, we're going to get divorced.
Because keep this in mind, Brian, marriage is an institution that was invented when people got married at 17. They married somebody in their town. And then
farmed for 10 years.
They had a bunch of kids, and then somebody got the plague, and it was over.
Yeah, I know. It's
and
a shorter window.
So if planes went down 50% of the time or 70% of the time, you would never fly anywhere. But marriage as an institution now has a fail rate of, depending on what city you're living in, between 50 and 70%. So people are trying to...
That doesn't even include the people who should be divorced and stay together unhappily.
Exactly. And so now people are creating these alternative lifestyles like open marriages, polyamory. And I'm not judging. I'm just saying there are all of these options out there now. But, you know, nobody's really yet having the conversation.
If you have 2 girlfriends, it's because you don't have 1. Does that make sense? Because if you liked the first one enough, you wouldn't need the second one.
I have never heard a guy say that before, but thank you for that, Brian.
Yeah,
that warms my cockles.
Well, I think that like if you love the first one, you don't need the second one.
Or men will say, I'm confused. I have stuff I'm still working out. To which my response is like,
be Mormon and have 4 wives.
Yeah, or like work it out. Yeah. But just not with me. Like, I don't want to be, I went on a date with a guy who was in an open relationship. I did it mainly out of curiosity. He had a wife of 33 years. He had a girlfriend he saw on Tuesdays. And I said, well, what am I? Like the out of town hookup? And he said, well, that's very pejorative. I said, well, what is it? Do I get a t-shirt? Do I get a prize? Like,
but you just said you might be open to something like that. This occasional, isn't that sort of the same? I'll just be the Thursday night person.
No, because I would like to ideally be in a relationship that just because it's long distance doesn't mean that in between we're seeing other people.
Oh yeah. Details.
Yeah. So I do think it's possible to have a monogamous long distance relationship.
You should. And it's a little easier at 60 because you don't have to do it for 60 years. You can do you're doing it for like 25. You're doing less time. Maybe.
Exactly.
Maybe
and
not.
Also being respectful of the other person. Like there are things that I like to do that I do with my girlfriends that I wouldn't necessarily expect the man in my life to come along for that. Like if I want to watch reality TV on Tuesday nights, I'm fine doing that alone. I don't have to do it with a companion. So I think there's also this thing that we've been raised with, especially as women, that you're going to, in fact, was my first dating blog was the Bee Gees led us astray because they said, I just want to be your everything.
Yeah.
And nobody could be your everything. You've got to have a little entourage around you.
Is a 65-year-old faster to introduce a date to their kids or grandkids than a 45-year-old?
It really depends on the person. I have friends who are in their 40s who really wait until they're sure something is serious before they bring a significant other around. My kids, even though they're grown and I'm grown, have only met one person that I was seeing in 10 years.
Because I think they think it would be cool. Like, oh, look, grandma's 82. She's dating. Like, I think it would be more positive that they're finding at least some degree of happiness or pleasure or sex.
My kids know that I'm dating. I think they probably are thinking, what's wrong? What the hell is wrong with her? She's been single for 3 years and can't seem to, settle on somebody. But, at this stage of my life, I'd rather do it right, even if it's for 6 months or a year. I would rather have 6 great months or a year. Like, I don't think it's, anything is forever. And as you just pointed out, so optimistically, it could be like I could drop dead as soon as we're done with this podcast. Poi, 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 as my mother would say.
We all could. All right, I'm going to let you plug whatever you want to plug. But in the interest of time, this is your first time on this podcast. We play something called Worst Date or First Date, which means you have to give us either the absolute worst date you ever went on or the greatest first date you went on, your choice.
Ooh. Probably the worst date, just because it was a major, major time and energy suck, is I drove about an hour to meet somebody to discover that he was 20 years older than the age he had reported on his profile. And I didn't want to, if it had been 5 minutes away, the date would have lasted 15 minutes and I would have left. But instead, because I felt sorry for him, I stayed the entire hour, had dinner with him, listened to him talk about the good old days. And
but if you knew how old he was, would you have gone that far? You wouldn't have gone. He basically had to lie on his resume to get the job interview.
Yeah, and he lied by a lot. If somebody lies, by like 20.
Did he admit, when you confronted him, like what, did he say like, I wanted you to come? You wouldn't have come? Like, how did he get out of that? 20's a lot. Like, what did he say?
When I realized how old he was?
Yeah. Did you confront him, or you're just like, this guy's lying about his age and you didn't bring it up?
Yeah, I didn't confront him.
Maybe he just looked bad. Or was he like, back in the 20s?
He was talking about like
things that he wouldn't have known.
Right.
No. Sorry, fella.
Back in the 1940s.
Yeah. I got out of the war. The big one, WW2.
Yeah, and it really becomes more of a, in that Venn diagram of relationships, which is a phrase I use a lot, you just have to have enough in the magic middle. The age is almost secondary. If somebody is interested in the same stuff that I'm interested in, they can match my energy level or come close. They have the same sense of humor. The age almost becomes irrelevant.
The magic middle. I like that. That's good. All right. Plug whatever you want to plug.
All right. So my podcast is officially launching on October 7th, which is Ageism Awareness Day. As Brian said, the title of it is The Geezer Proofer, How to Be a Badass After 50. And what I'm trying to do is combat all of the women's comedy and women's rhetoric out there that aging is a bad thing and that we have to have our boobs lifted and our faces Botoxed. And I've had no work done. I'm 67. I plan to live another 30 years minimum till I hit 100. My mother, God bless her, was 95 when she died. My grandmother was 99. So the statistics are on my side. And I really want to create a spirit of positive and fun aging so that young women don't dread getting older. But I am also going to address some of the serious issues around ageism and employment, perceptions of older people. So it's going to be everything aging, sex, tech, and lifestyle.
You know, that's the fine line that's going on as we record this. And you might be listening to this in 2027 and who knows what happened. But, you know, the Joe Biden issue, is it the age or is it the, you know, mental faculty, or like you're kind of, because I don't ever want to draw, because they're like, nobody should run for office if they're this age. I don't think you could ever be hard and fast on that or make the rules or laws around that, because who knows? There's always exceptions. There's people that are 61 and they seem 1,000.
Yeah, and I just listened to Mick Jagger's new single,
Oh, yeah,
and
he's
nobody
81.
says he shouldn't be recording music.
That's a very good point. Mick Jagger would be a fine British prime minister. That's good. This is fun.
It was.
All right. Go out and go date. As far as us, like, share, follow. Please review this podcast. Your reviews to this day mean a lot in the podcasting ecosystem. Shoot us an email, greatloveDebate@gmail.com. If you've got thoughts, questions, or you want to date somebody in their late 80s, we'll pass it along. We'll match it up for you. The magic middle. Go to greatlovedebate.com. I believe there are some live shows on. Again, every time I say this, I'm like, I don't want to go back on the road again. But people are calling from fancy venues around the country. We're probably doing a show at City Winery in New York, and that may or may not be on sale by the time you do this. By the time you listen to this, because as always, at the Great Love Debate, we never stop making love. See you next time.